Okay, you recall metabolism is all the set of all chemical reactions that a cell can do. Okay, and then we talked about two types of metabolism or metabolic pathways. We talked about catabolic pathways, and that's when something breaks down, like digestion. So you got a big molecule breaking down into monomers. Okay, that releases energy. Then we have anabolic metabolism pathways, and that would be where a smaller thing forms a bigger molecule, and that takes energy in order to happen. Okay, ATP is the molecule that provides energy to any endergonic reaction. It's coupled. The reaction ATP forms ADP plus phosphate plus energy is what runs almost all the endergonic reactions that require energy input. So ATP is like a charged up battery, ready to give off energy when needed. So ATP is adenosine triphosphate. Okay, so we have a nitrogen base, adenine, which is like part of a nucleic acid. We got ribose sugar, the same sugar that's in RNA. And then we got that ribose connected to the three phosphate groups, PO4 groups. So phosphate, when one of the phosphates disconnects, a lot of energy is given off. These are high energy bonds between the phosphate groups. So ATP is used for all kinds of chemical work. It does active transport. When ATP releases its energy, it can power proton pumps, active transport. It can power the membrane to do phagocytosis or exocytosis or endocytosis. It can move molecules and organelles on the cytoskeleton. On the cytoskeleton fibers. Motor proteins, those are called. It can power endergonic reactions, like we said before, like reactions that require energy, anabolic reactions that require energy. So ATP powers all these things in the sense that it provides energy that's needed for these reactions to go. Okay, ATP will turn into ADP plus that extra phosphate group after it gives off its energy. Now, ADP is like a battery that can be recharged, and we'll talk about that. That's the whole point of respiration, to charge up the ADPs to ATPs. So ATP is constantly being recycled and recharged and then reused. Look, in one cell. Okay, so we just to summarize, ATP will turn into ADP and release the energy, and that energy will be used to do all the things that we just talked about, primarily to run endergonic reactions. Now, so this is a charged up battery. Think about it like that. This is a battery that's undischarged. It's like a discharged battery. We can charge up the battery again by adding energy to it and turning it back to ATP. So we're adding energy from catabolic reactions. Now, primarily, that's respiration, by the process of respiration, which you recall every living thing does. Now, respiration will recharge the batteries. They'll turn the ADP back to ATP, but that's the process of respiration. So the discharged battery will be charged up, ready to go again, but you have to do respiration to charge up the battery, ADP to ATP. Let's talk about photosynthesis now. Here are two videos right here that really are worth your time to sit down and watch, that really do a good job of helping you to understand the steps in photosynthesis. So photosynthesis means light is what photo means, and synthesis means building a molecule. So what photosynthesis does is use sunlight to build, the energy of sunlight to build the glucose molecule. So because the molecule is being built up, photosynthesis is an anabolic process. You should know that. And many chemical reactions in a photosynthetic pathway, which we'll go into some detail. So here's the equation for photosynthesis. Unbalanced, so 6 carbon dioxide, I'll balance it, plus 6 water molecules, plus sunlight, but sunlight's energy, so I don't write it, forms glucose C6H12O6 plus 6 oxygen. So that's overall the net equation for photosynthesis. So basically, photosynthesis captures the energy of the sunlight and stores it in the chemical bonds in the glucose molecule, which it builds with that energy. You should really memorize this equation or recognize it on a test. Okay, to a certain point, the more light you have shining on a plant, the more photosynthesis that plant can do. So with no light, you'll have, like at night, it will do no photosynthesis. This is the rate of photosynthesis, the y-axis. That's 0. With 0 light intensity, you have no photosynthesis. And as you increase the light intensity, you hit a certain point where the rate levels off. Okay? It plateaus off. So obviously there's light, the amount of light a plant gets is directly related to how much photosynthesis it can do to a certain point. The products of photosynthesis are glucose and oxygen. Carbon dioxide is a reactant. Okay, sorry. Photosynthesis is a spontaneous reaction. No. Photosynthesis builds a molecule, it builds glucose. So it's an anabolic reaction. Anabolic reactions require energy input. So it's not spontaneous unless the sun's out. Okay, so it's false. The process of photosynthesis captures the energy of the sun and stores it as chemical energy in the chemical bonds of glucose. So there we go. The equation shows the reaction and products, the reactants and products of photosynthesis. Remember, reactants go on the left side, products go on the right side. So no glucose is produced. Water, we don't write sunlight. Sunlight's energy, even though it's important. Carbon dioxide and water and carbon dioxide forms glucose. Okay, this is it. So chlorophyll is the green pigment in plants that does the absorbing of the solar energy. It picks out of the sunlight the red and violet, blue wavelengths, or those particular wavelengths out of sunlight. We'll talk about that later. And so chlorophyll, I showed as a green block right here. So what happens is the sunlight, look at this picture. The sunlight knocks out, it excites the electrons in a chlorophyll molecule. And those electrons fall down an energy transport chain. These are molecules that pass the electrons along. So we call that electron transport chain. So as those electrons get to the bottom of the electron transport chain, think of it as a staircase. That energy has been released. So that from the electron, that electron has lost its energy. That energy is transferred from the excited electron from the chlorophyll molecule. That energy is transferred and energizes an ATP-like energy molecule called NADPH. Okay, so that energizes the NADP plus and turns it into NADPH, which is the high energy form of NADP. Okay, so this is like ADP getting energized to ATP. No, the NADPH will be used later on in photosynthesis to build glucose. So we'll leave it at that right now. Okay, so chlorophyll absorbs mostly red and blue wavelengths of visible light. Okay, sunlight is white, but white light, if you put white light through a prism, you can tell that it spreads out into a rainbow, Roy G. Bibb. And chlorophyll just picks out the red and the purplish colors. It just absorbs the red and the purplish blue colors. It reflects green light. That's why a plant looks green. Now, the chlorophyll is in those flat inner membranes of the chloroplast. Remember the chloroplast? There's outer membrane. Here's inner membrane, and the inner membrane forms these like coin-like stacks of coins. And each of those coin-like things, each of those discs, is a thylakoid membrane, part of the inner membrane. Okay? You'll see a better picture coming up. So here's a picture of 3 types of chlorophyll. Well, 3 types of pigments that a plant uses. Chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, and carotene. We're concerned with chlorophyll A because that's the main energy absorber, the primary energy absorber in a plant's leaves. Okay, so which one is? Okay, so I guess the solid line is chlorophyll A. So if you look at, this is the amount of light absorbed of, let's see, Roy G. Biv. Okay, so you can see that it peaks in the indigo blue region. There's a little peak here, but mostly blue. And it also peaks in the red. So those are the primary energies of the sunlight that's being absorbed. You see that green is the least absorbed. And so it appears, plant appears green because the green part of the sunlight is not absorbed by a plant, but is reflected. So here's a good picture of a chloroplast cutaway. There's the thylakoids that I was talking about. And the thylakoids are each of those little discs. Each of those little discs is a thylakoid. And the stack is called a granum, a stack of thylakoids. Now, there's 2 kinds of reactions that occur for photosynthesis, 2 major subdivisions, the light reactions, or called the light-dependent reactions, and that occurs in the thylakoid, as I wrote here. And then the dark reactions don't require light. They occur in the stroma, which is the liquid that surrounds the granum, or the thylakoids. So here you see that, again, this is supposed to be the chloroplast, this big oval thing. There's a granum with the thylakoids in it. And that's where NADP and ADP are energized. I didn't say anything about ATP yet, but when we go into light reaction in more detail, we'll show you that. But that's where these discharged batteries, as it were, are charged up. And it's charged up by the energy of the sunlight. Knocks off chlorophyll electrons. Those hyper-energized electrons fall down electron transport chains. And that energy is used of that electron released from the chlorophyll, is used to energize ADP and NADP to form the charged up forms of those molecules, ATP and NADPH. And then those molecules, those charged up molecules are going to go into what is called the dark reactions, or also called the light independent reactions, also called the Calvin cycle, but we'll talk about that coming up. That occurs in a stroma. Okay, to think ahead a little bit, in the light reactions, that's where oxygen is released into the atmosphere. I'll explain why in a few minutes, but water is split into oxygen and hydrogen. The hydrogen will be added to the NADP to form NADPH. Okay, but the oxygen is released into the air. Thank God for that, because without that oxygen, we wouldn't be around. We couldn't breathe and do respiration. Okay, so water is split, producing oxygen gas in the light reactions. In the dark reactions, carbon dioxide is fixed and forms this 3-carbon carbohydrate that will form glucose. So this is a rough overview of photosynthesis 2 stages, the light reactions and the dark reactions. Now let's focus in on the light reaction in details, that half that was shown in the previous picture. Okay, so this is all this is in the thylakoids. All this is happening in the thylakoids right there. Okay, all this is the thylakoid membrane. Okay, the membrane of the thylakoid. Okay, now this side of the thylakoid membrane right here is the space inside the thylakoid coin. It's called the thylakoid space. Thylakoid space. And this side right here, on this side of the membrane, is the stroma. Now PS2 right here and PS1. PS stands for photosystems. All it is a bunch of chlorophyll molecules organized in these structures called photosystems. So that's where the chlorophyll is, and that's where the light gets absorbed by. Okay, so here's light hitting photosystem 2. There's 2 kinds of photosystems. The first one was discovered, and then the PS2 was discovered after that, but that doesn't really matter. So light hits photosystem 2. Electrons are knocked off, and right here is the first electron chain, where those knocked off electrons, those excited electrons, will fall and lose their energy and give it to NADPH. Okay, so what happens is the electron, the de-energized electron, goes down that photosystem 2, goes down this, loses this energy, and that energy will power a hydrogen pump protein, active transport, and push hydrogen ions through to the thylakoid space. So it'll push hydrogen ions where they're not as concentrated in the stroma, and it'll push them into the thylakoid space. Okay, that's going to be important. So I told you before that electrons from the chlorophyll get popped out, energized from the chlorophyll molecules after after the, the chlorophyll absorbs the sunlight. And then as they fall down that ETC, I said that the energy is used to energize this NADP. Well, it is, but not directly, not at first. So there's two ETCs. The second ETC is where the energy is released to charge that. So what's the deal here? So let's just review that. The electron is energized from the photosystem too because of the sunlight energy, and it falls down this electron transport chain, losing its energy to power a hydrogen pump that pushes hydrogen ions from a low concentration to a high concentration on the other side in the thylakoid space. Now, forget about the hydrogen ions right now. So, let's go back. Why is hydrogen getting split and forming H hydrogen gas and oxygen? So let me balance it here, 4 right there, and that's it. Okay, so the hydrogen is being split by an enzyme is helping this reaction, is being split by the energy of the sunlight. And it's breaking up into oxygen gas, which is released into the atmosphere, and then these hydrogen ions. Those hydrogen ions will later attach to the NADP, which is like a worn out battery that needs to be recharged. Okay, now the whole point that's happening is to replenish the electrons to the photosystem 2 that were energized by the light absorbed by PS2 and therefore escaped the chlorophyll molecules and went down ETC1, the electron transport chain. So you got to replace those electrons to the chlorophyll, or else there won't be any other electrons that can be energized. So that's the point of why water is split during the light reactions, releasing H plus ions and oxygen gas. Okay, now let's go back to where we left off. Okay, so we left off here. So those electrons still continue moving to fill in the spaces for the electrons that are going to be released by PS1, which I haven't talked about. So these low energy electrons will now will fall down that electron transport chain and will replenish the electrons that escape, because there is light being added to that photosystem too. That light absorbs PS1 electrons. They jump off, they jump down and fall down this electron transport chain. Now the energy of those electrons as they fall down the second electron transport chain right here, that energy is used to energize NADP into NADPH. Okay, and then it needs the hydrogens from over here, from the water being split. Okay, well, a lot of those hydrogens are getting pumped out, right? Now, you might say, well, why are they using hydrogens when they're being pumped out? We're wasting energy to pump those hydrogens out, making them more concentrated on this side when we need a few of them to do to energize NADPH and turn it into this high energy ATP like molecule NADPH. Okay, that's coming up now. So you see these high concentration of yellow balls on the thylakoid space side. Well, what's happening is they will diffuse through a special channel protein that is really an enzyme called ATP synthase. So it makes ATP, it charges up ATP. So as the ions, the hydrogen ions, diffuse through the ATP synthase, that energy is like water flowing down a cliff and energizing a paddle wheel that's connected to an electrical generator, electricity generation. But anyway, when you have passive transport, you're giving off energy. The ions moving from a high concentration to a low concentration place will give off energy, and that energy can be used to energize ADP. I should add from ATP. So the light reactions, basically, what do? They produce NADPH and ATP. That is the whole purpose of the light reactions. Now, those energy molecules will be used in the next set of reactions, the dark reactions. That's where glucose is built. That is an metabolic pathway. It requires energy, and the energy will be supplied by NADPH and ATP. So to review, let's go back to this picture. The light reactions, they happen in the thylakoid membranes, in the granum, inside the chloroplast. Okay, we have the whole purpose is to charge up these de-energized molecules of NADP and ADP and to charge them up to ATP and NADPH. Okay, the energy to do that came basically from the electrons from chlorophyll absorbing the energy. Okay, so these guys will now power the ATP and NADPH will now power the anabolic reaction. This way. That will produce glucose from carbon dioxide. Now, in using these energy sources, when the energy is taken, they'll go back to the thylakoids and get recharged again over and over. So you can't have the dark reactions unless you have this produced from the light reaction, these energy molecules. Okay, again, here's the picture. Just remind you, stroma is a liquid surrounding the thylakoids. Thylakoids are part of the inner membrane. Okay, it branches off to the thylakoids in this space. And that's it. The dark cycle, the dark reactions, also called the Calvin cycles, takes part in the stroma. whereas the light reactions take place in the thylakoids or the granum. Okay, so this is the looking complicated picture of the dark reactions, also called the Calvin cycle. Okay, so first of all, the most important thing to realize is that those energy molecules, ATP and NADPH, are now going to be discharged. And that energy is going to be used to build glucose. Here's glucose, or half of glucose at least, at the very end. So, and then the discharged batteries will go back to the light reactions to get recharged so that the dark reactions can keep on going, making more glucose. So now let's go to where we want, this is a cycle, so let's start the cycle with where this red circle is. Okay, so here's where carbon dioxide is fixed. Now, when I say fixed, I mean it's taken out of the air and the carbon in the carbon dioxide is changed to the carbon in sugar, is connected to a carbon backbone here, right here. So you can see that what was there before is this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 carbon sugar. Now it has another carbon there. That's because carbon was attached to it by this enzyme, probably the most important enzyme in the world, rubisco. Because if rubisco wasn't there, carbon couldn't be fixed, and there would be no glucose, and that's what we need. We can't make it. We get it from plants or animals that have eaten plants. Okay, so that molecule is short-lived. It breaks down, and then it's energized by ATP and NADPH some more to make higher energy molecules, carbohydrates, and then it comes out of the cycle as half a glucose molecule, 3 carbons, and then the rest forms that 5 carbon molecule, and the cycle repeats. Okay, so the whole point of this is to make glucose. Okay, so you don't have to do all this memorizing. So with one turn of the cycle, only 1 carbon is fixed, and it takes 3 turns to make half a glucose molecule, a 3 sugar molecule. And so it takes a total of 6 turns of the dark cycle, the Calvin cycle. It takes 6 turns to make 1 glucose molecule. So let's do some of these review questions. Which of the following is found in the thylakoid? Well, that's where the chlorophyll is. Carbon dioxide is fixed in the form of glucose carbon dioxide is fixed in glucose in the dark reactions. Okay, so the Calvin cycle, or it's called the light independent reactions. I just call it the dark reactions. You don't need the dark to do it. It's just that you don't need sunlight to have it continued to do the dark reactions if you have the ATP and NADPH. Okay, during which stage of photosynthesis are ATP and NADPH converted to these lower energy forms? So this is like the charged battery, these two up here. And this is like a discharge or dead battery. that needs to be recharged. These two guys. So where do we use the batteries? Where do we use the energy molecules? We use them in the dark reactions, which would be that right there. Also called the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle is an anabolic pathway. True or false? Yeah, that's glucose building up from carbon dioxide. So we got 3 carbons from carbon dioxide basically forming glucose with 6 carbons. And that's anabolic. Obviously, anabolic needs energy. And you get the energy from ATP and NADPH. Okay, so that's true.